Montana Territory, 1882. The fading light of dusk painted the rolling prairie in amber hues as Colton Newsom sat atop his horse, surveying what remained of the Dalton cattle ranch. At 26, he'd spent 8 years driving cattle, breaking horses, and sleeping under star-filled skies. His face, handsome despite the light stubble that had accumulated over the past 2 days, betrayed little emotion, but his eyes told a different story. They searched the horizon restlessly, as if looking for something lost. "No one finds happiness out here," he mumbled to himself, a belief forged through years of watching men lose everything to drought, bandits, and broken dreams. The frontier had taught Colton one lesson above all others: attachment was dangerous. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. He adjusted his well-worn Stetson and nudged his horse forward. The Double D Ranch had fallen into disrepair since old man Dalton died 6 months ago. Its one-sprout fences now sagged, and the bunkhouse windows stared back like hollow eyes. But Colton hadn't purchased these 5,000 acres for their value as grazing land. He'd bought them for what, or rather who, they represented. Faith Dalton. The memory of her struck him like a physical blow. Faith, with her honey-blonde hair cascading past her shoulders and those clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. She'd been just 19 when they'd first met, him a ranch hand working for her father. Now at 21, she was somewhere east Boston, according to the gossiping townsfolk, sent away after her father's death when relatives claimed the ranch. "She's better off," Colton told himself, the mantra he'd repeated for months. Someone as fine as Faith deserved more than the brutal uncertainty of ranch life. The frontier broke everything beautiful eventually, yet here he was, his life savings spent on a neglected ranch, driven by a foolish hope he refused to name. 3 weeks after purchasing the Double D, Colton rode into Riverbed, the nearest town. The dusty main street bustled with the usual Friday activity, ranchers purchasing supplies, cowboys looking for entertainment after a long week. He tethered his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. "Afternoon, Mr. Newsom," said Walter Jenkins, the storekeeper, arranging a display of canned peaches. "Your order came in on yesterday's stage." "Appreciate it," Colton replied, approaching the counter. As Walter gathered the supplies, the door chimed again. Colton didn't turn until he heard Walter's surprised exclamation, "Miss Dalton. Lord above, we didn't expect to see you back in these parts." Colton's heart stuttered. He turned slowly, disbelieving, to find Faith Dalton standing in the doorway, the late morning sun creating a halo around her slender frame. Her honey-blonde hair was swept up in a fashion more elegant than the practical styles of the frontier, and her traveling dress, a rich blue that matched her eyes, spoke of Eastern influence. At 21, she'd grown even more beautiful than in his memories. Their eyes met across the cluttered store, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. "Colton," she whispered, her composure faltering, "what are you doing here?" "I thought you'd moved on after." "I did," he managed, his throat suddenly dry. "Then I came back." Walter, sensing the tension, busied himself with a ledger. "I'll just check on something in the back," he muttered, disappearing through a curtained doorway. Faith approached cautiously. "My aunt wrote that someone had purchased our ranch. She never mentioned it was you." "Your aunt doesn't know me," Colton said simply. "I only closed the deal a month ago." "But why?" Faith asked, confusion evident in her eyes. "That land is hardly worth what they were asking." Colton looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The truth was too revealing, too raw. "Seemed like a good investment," he lied. Something flickered in Faith's expression, disappointment perhaps. "I see," she said coolly. "Well, I've returned to collect the remainder of my personal belongings. My uncle arranged for me to stay with the Millers until I can return east." "You're going back to Boston?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "There's nothing for me here anymore," she replied, her voice carefully measured. "My family's ranch belongs to someone else now." The words stung more than they should have. "You're welcome to collect your things," Colton said stiffly. "The house is yours to visit whenever you please." Faith nodded formally. "Thank you, Mr. Newsom. I shall call tomorrow if that's convenient." "It is." An awkward silence stretched between them until Walter returned, saving them both from further conversation. Faith purchased a few items, bade them good day, and departed with the dignified grace that had always set her apart from other frontier women. Colton watched her go, the weight of unspoken words pressing on his chest. He'd spent everything he had to find her again, only to discover she was already planning her escape from the life he'd chosen. The next morning, Colton woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of ranch work. He spent 2 hours repairing a section of the main house's porch that had rotted through, then swept and tidied the interior as best he could. He felt foolish preparing for Faith's visit but couldn't help himself. She arrived precisely at 10, driving a borrowed buggy. Colton watched from the barn as she sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the house that had once been her home. When she finally approached the porch, he met her there. "The garden's gone wild," she remarked, glancing at what had once been her mother's pride, now overgrown with prairie grasses. "Haven't had time to tackle it yet," Colton admitted. "Been focusing on the fences and cattle." Faith nodded, her eyes scanning the property. "You've been busy. It already looks better than I expected." He opened the front door for her. "Take all the time you need. I've got work in the north pasture." "Actually," Faith said hesitantly, "would you mind showing me what you've done with the place? It's difficult coming back alone." The request surprised him. "Of course." They walked through the house together, Faith occasionally touching a piece of furniture or gazing at the empty spaces where family portraits once hung. In her father's study, she paused by the desk where he'd conducted ranch business for 30 years. "I expected everything to be different," she confessed, "but you've kept it much the same." "Seemed right to respect what was here before," Colton replied. "Your father built something good." Faith's composure cracked slightly. "He worked himself to death for this place, and in the end, it wasn't even mine to keep. The bank and my uncle made certain of that." "What happened?" Colton asked, the question that had burned within him since hearing of the ranch's sale. Faith's eyes grew distant. "Father left debts I knew nothing about. The drought 2 years ago hit harder than he let on. He mortgaged everything to keep going, then his heart gave out." She turned away. "My uncle claimed a woman couldn't run a cattle operation, especially one in financial trouble." The bank agreed. "That's not right," Colton said fiercely. "You grew up on this ranch. You know it better than most men who claim to be cattlemen." A small smile touched her lips. "That sounds like the Colton Newsom who used to argue with my father about giving me more responsibilities." "Your father was stubborn, but he loved you," Colton said gently. "He wanted to protect you from this life. And instead, I ended up in Boston with relatives who see me as nothing but a burden to marry off," Faith replied bitterly. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." Faith descended the stairs to stand beside Colton. "Mr. Harmon." "I've come with a proposition," Harmon announced, turning back to Colton. "I'll give you 20% more than you paid for this ranch, cash." Colton's face revealed nothing, not interested. "You haven't heard my reasoning," Harmon pressed. "This land rightfully should have been mine. Dalton and I had an agreement before he died." Faith stiffened. "What agreement?" Harmon smiled coldly. "Your father promised to sell to me if he couldn't keep up the payments. We shook on it. Then he died, and your eastern relatives sold to the first buyer without honoring Joseph's word." "My father would never sell to you," Faith said firmly. "He knew what kind of neighbor you were." "A successful one," Harmon snapped. "Unlike Joseph, who let sentiment cloud his business sense." He turned back to Colton. "You've been swindled, Newsom. This land comes with complications you don't understand." "I understand just fine," Colton replied. "And my answer's still no." Harmon's face darkened. "Don't be a fool. Water rights alone will bankrupt you by summer's end. The creek that feeds your cattle crosses my property first." "That creek is on the property line," Faith interjected. "My father made certain the survey showed equal access." "Surveys can be redrawn," one of Harmon's men remarked with a smirk. Colton stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "You've delivered your offer, I've declined. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my land." Harmon studied him for a long moment. "You'll regret this decision, Cowboy. Nobody refuses Victor Harmon and prospers." He jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Think on my offer. It expires in 1 week." The 3 men rode away, leaving Colton and Faith standing in uneasy silence. "He's lying about my father," Faith said finally. "I know," Colton assured her, "but he's not lying about making trouble." Faith looked up at him, genuine concern in her eyes. "Colton, why did you really buy this ranch? Harmon's right about one thing, it's not worth what you must have paid." Colton met her gaze, knowing the moment had come for truth. I bought it because it was yours, he said simply. When I heard it had been sold out from under you, I couldn't bear the thought of strangers living where you should be. Faith's eyes widened, but you left 2 years ago. You never even said goodbye. Because your father asked me to go, Colton admitted. He saw how I looked at you, said a ranch hand with nothing to his name had no business courting Joseph Dalton's daughter. He had no right, Faith whispered, color rising in her cheeks. He had every right, Colton countered. I had nothing to offer you then. And no. Colton gestured to the ranch around them. Now I have this. It's not much yet, but I'm rebuilding it. For you, the words tumbled out before he could reconsider. I bought it to find you again, Faith, to give you back what should have been yours. Faith stared at him, speechless. Then, to Colton's dismay, tears welled in her eyes. You spent everything you had for me, she asked, her voice breaking. Colton nodded, suddenly uncertain. I never stopped thinking about you, even told myself you were better off away from this hard country. But when I heard the ranch was being sold, I knew I had to try. Faith stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her soap. For 2 years, I wondered why you disappeared. Father told me you'd found better opportunities elsewhere. I'm sorry, Colton said softly. I should have found a way to tell you the truth. She studied his face, searching for something. And now? What do you want now, Colton? I want you to stay, he said simply. Help me make this place what it should be, what your father wanted it to be. As what? Faith asked, her voice steady despite the tears still shining in her eyes. Your ranch hand. Colton swallowed hard, as whatever you want to be, partner, friend, he paused. More if you'll have me. Before Faith could respond, the distant sound of a wagon interrupted them. They turned to see a cloud of dust approaching from town. Are you expecting someone? Faith asked. Colton shook his head. No, but trouble seems to be finding us today. As the wagon drew closer, they recognized Sheriff Miller at the reins, with another man beside him. When they pulled up to the house, Colton saw the second man was wearing an expensive suit that marked him as a city dweller. Afternoon, Colton, Miss Dalton, the sheriff greeted them, tipping his hat. This here's Mr. Abernathy from the Territorial Land Office. He's got some business to discuss. Abernathy stepped down from the wagon, brushing dust from his suit. Mr. Newsom, Miss Dalton, I apologize for the intrusion, but a matter has come to our attention regarding the deed to this property. Colton felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. What matter would that be? The land agent pulled papers from his briefcase. It appears there may have been irregularities in the transfer of ownership. Mr. Victor Harmon has filed a formal challenge, claiming prior verbal agreement with the deceased owner. That's preposterous, Faith exclaimed. My father would never sell to Victor Harmon. Nevertheless, miss, the claim must be investigated, Abernathy replied. In the meantime, the territorial governor has ordered a stay on any improvements or changes to the property until ownership can be definitively established. Colton struggled to contain his anger. I have a legal deed paid in full. Yes, sir, and that will certainly weigh in your favor, the agent said diplomatically. But Mr. Harmon has submitted affidavits from witnesses claiming knowledge of this prior agreement. Witnesses he paid to lie, Faith said bitterly. Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably. I don't like this any more than you do, but the law's the law. Until the land office makes its determination, things stay as they are. How long? Colton demanded. The hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks from now in Helena, Abernathy answered. Both parties will present their evidence. After the officials departed, Colton paced the porch, his face tight with controlled fury. Harmon must have had this planned before I even bought the ranch. He was just waiting to spring the trap. Faith watched him, her own anger evident. He's always wanted our water rights. Without that creek, his western grazing lands are useless in summer. 6 weeks, Colton muttered. The herd needs moving to summer pasture before then. Can you delay? Colton shook his head, not with the feed running low. And if we can't improve the property, I can't repair the fence line in the north section. Faith was quiet for a moment, then said decisively, I'll stay. Colton stopped pacing. What? I'll stay and help fight this, she repeated. This ranch is rightfully yours now, but it was my family's for 30 years. I know every document my father ever signed. If Harmon is forging agreements, I'll know. Your return to Boston. Can wait, Faith finished for him. I never wanted to go back anyway. She hesitated, then added more softly, and there are things between us that remain unresolved. For the first time that day, hope flickered in Colton's chest. Where will you stay? The Miller family offered their spare room, but she met his eyes steadily. I'd rather stay here, in my home, if that's acceptable to you. It's your house, Colton said. Always will be, deed or no deed. Then we'll fight Harmon together, Faith declared, a new determination in her voice. And while we wait for the hearing, you can tell me exactly what you meant about wanting me to stay permanently. The weeks that followed brought both challenges and unexpected joys. Faith moved back into her childhood bedroom, while Colton continued sleeping in the bunkhouse with his hired hands. Their arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but Sheriff Miller's wife, Martha, volunteered as chaperone 3 days a week, quieting the worst of the gossip. Together, they examined every document related to the ranch, searching for anything that might help their case. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold while sharing stories of the years they'd spent apart. Faith told him of Boston's stifling society, where she'd felt like a curious specimen, the wild western girl to be tamed and married off. Colton described his journeys through Wyoming and Colorado, working ranches and saving every penny, always haunted by her memory. I convinced myself you were better off without me, he confessed one evening as they sat side by side on the porch steps. That someone like you deserved more than a cowboy with calloused hands and empty pockets. Faith reached over and took one of those calloused hands in hers. I never wanted more. I just wanted you to see me as more than Joseph Dalton's daughter. I always saw you, Faith, Colton said quietly. That was the problem. I saw you too clearly, and it scared me how much I wanted a future I didn't think I could have. As May turned to June, the work of the ranch couldn't wait despite the land office's restrictions. Colton and his men moved the cattle to summer pasture, careful to document that they were maintaining rather than improving the operation. Faith proved herself indispensable, her knowledge of the ranch's operations more comprehensive than even Colton had realized. My father taught me everything when I was young, she explained as they rode fence lines together. After my mother died, I was his shadow. It wasn't until I turned 16 that he started insisting I become a proper lady. Their partnership deepened with each passing day, trust building between them as naturally as breathing. But Victor Harmon wasn't content to wait for the hearing. 3 weeks after filing his claim, Colton discovered fences cut along the creek boundary and 20 head of cattle missing. It's Harmon, he told Faith as they examined the damaged fence, trying to provoke me into doing something that would hurt our case. Faith's expression hardened. Then we document everything and take it to the sheriff. We fight this legally. Sheriff Miller investigated but found insufficient evidence to charge Harmon. The missing cattle hadn't appeared in his herd, and the cut fences could have been the work of anyone. He's too smart to get caught red-handed, Faith fumed as they rode back from town, and he has too many friends in high places. That night, as they sat in the kitchen after a late supper, Faith noticed Colton was unusually quiet, his expression troubled. What is it, she asked, beyond the obvious problems with Harmon? Colton met her eyes reluctantly. I found something today, something your father left behind. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, weathered and creased. It was hidden in a compartment under his desk drawer. I was looking for any documents that might help our case. Faith took the paper cautiously. As she unfolded it, her eyes widened. It was a letter dated 3 weeks before her father's death, addressed to Victor Harmon. I've considered your offer and must decline, she read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. The double D will never be yours, Victor. Not while I draw breath and not after. I've made arrangements to ensure it passes intact to my daughter. Your threats mean nothing to me. Faith looked up, tears in her eyes. He knew. He knew Harmon was after the ranch, and he was protecting it for me. There's more, Colton said gently. She returned to the letter. Should anything happen to me before Faith comes of age, I've entrusted this property to the care of Colton Newsom, a man I've misjudged but whose character I've come to respect. He will hold it in trust until my daughter can claim her birthright. Faith's hands trembled. He never sent this. No, Colton agreed, and he never told me. He died before he could implement whatever plan he had. But this proves Harmon is lying, Faith insisted. Father explicitly refused to sell to him. Colton nodded slowly. It helps, but it's not conclusive proof that there wasn't a later agreement. Harmon will claim this letter predates their verbal contract. Faith stared at the letter, her mind racing. There has to be more. Father wouldn't leave things so uncertain. Over the next 2 days, they searched the house methodically, looking for any additional evidence Joseph might have left behind. They found nothing until Faith remembered her father's habit of hiding important documents in his favorite books. He loved Moby Dick, she said, pulling the volume from a shelf in his study. Said it reminded him that obsession destroys men. Inside the book, they discovered a sealed envelope addressed to Faith, dated 1 week before Joseph's death. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read her father's final words. "My dearest Faith," she began, her voice catching. "If you are reading this, I have left this world sooner than intended. Forgive an old man's failings. I tried to protect you from the harsh realities of our life here, and in doing so, I may have robbed you of your rightful place." Faith paused, composing herself before continuing. "Victor Harmon has threatened to destroy everything we've built unless I sell to him. He claims to own notes of debt that would ruin us. I believe these claims to be fraudulent, but proving so would require resources I no longer possess. Rather than submit to his threats, I have taken steps to secure your future. Enclosed you will find a properly executed will, witnessed by Judge Carlton and Reverend Summers, leaving the Double D Ranch entirely to you upon my death. I have also included documentation of Harmon's threats, which may prove useful should he continue his pursuit after I am gone." Faith looked up at Colton, hope blazing in her eyes. "The will and evidence were supposed to be enclosed, but they're not here." Colton frowned. "Someone removed them." "My uncle," Faith realized. "He handled all the papers after Father died. If he found these documents, he could have suppressed them to force the sale," Colton finished grimly. "But why?" Faith's expression darkened. "Because Victor Harmon would have paid him handsomely to ensure the ranch went to market quickly, without legal complications." The revelation sent them to Helena the next day, where they convinced Judge Carlton to provide a sworn statement confirming he had witnessed Joseph Dalton's will. The judge, troubled by the potential fraud, also wrote to Reverend Summers, who had since relocated to Oregon. 2 days before the land office hearing, Reverend Summers' reply arrived, accompanied by a duplicate copy of Joseph Dalton's will that the Reverend had kept among his personal papers. "This changes everything," Sheriff Miller said when they brought him the evidence. "I'll wire the territorial governor immediately." The morning of the hearing dawned clear and hot. Colton and Faith traveled to Helena together, their case strengthened but victory far from certain. Victor Harmon arrived with 2 lawyers and the confident air of a man accustomed to getting his way. As the proceedings began, Harmon's attorneys presented affidavits from 3 witnesses claiming knowledge of a verbal agreement between Joseph Dalton and their client. They also produced bank records showing the Double D's precarious financial position before Joseph's death. "It stands to reason," Harmon's lawyer argued, "that a man facing financial ruin would seek to salvage what he could through a private arrangement with a neighbor. Mr. Dalton verbally agreed to sell to Mr. Harmon should his situation become untenable." When Colton's turn came, he presented Judge Carlton's statement and Reverend Summers' letter, along with the duplicate will leaving the ranch explicitly to Faith. The land commissioner examined the documents carefully. "This will appears legally executed," he acknowledged. "However, it was never filed with the territorial court. The ranch was sold by Mr. Dalton's brother-in-law acting as next of kin." "Because my uncle deliberately concealed the will," Faith stated firmly. "We believe he colluded with Mr. Harmon for personal gain." Harmon surged to his feet. "That's slander. I never met her uncle before the sale." The commissioner raised his hand for silence. "Miss Dalton, these are serious accusations. Do you have evidence of this collusion?" For a moment Faith faltered, then she straightened her shoulders. "My evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Why would my father execute a will leaving me the ranch, then verbally promise it to a man he despised? The letter we discovered, written in my father's hand, explicitly refuses Mr. Harmon's offers. She stepped forward, placing Joseph's letter to Harmon on the commissioner's desk. My father intended the ranch to be mine. When that became impossible due to my uncle's actions, Mr. Newsom purchased it to preserve what my family built. A touching story, Harmon's lawyer interjected, but hardly legal proof. The fact remains that the ranch was legally sold to Mr. Newsom by the recognized next of kin. The commissioner studied all the documents before him, then looked up at Colton. Mr. Newsom, you purchased this property through legal channels. Your deed appears valid. However, Miss Dalton's claim that her father intended her to inherit raises questions about the proper disposition of the estate. Colton nodded, then spoke words he'd carefully prepared. Sir, I bought the Double D Ranch knowing it rightfully belonged to Faith Dalton. My intention was always to return it to her once I found her. A murmur ran through the room. Faith stared at him in surprise. You're willing to relinquish your claim? The commissioner asked. No, sir, Colton replied steadily. I'm proposing a different solution. He turned to face Faith directly. I'd like to offer Miss Dalton a partnership. Equal ownership of the ranch that should have been hers. Together, we can make it prosper as her father intended. Harmon laughed derisively. This is absurd. The girl knows nothing about running a cattle operation. Faith's eyes never left Colton's as she responded. I was born on that ranch, Mr. Harmon. I know every acre, every stream, every head of cattle, and unlike you, I respect the land rather than seeing it as something to be exploited. The commissioner cleared his throat. While this is unusual, Mr. Newsom's proposal offers a reasonable compromise. Given the questions surrounding the original sale and Mr. Dalton's apparent intentions, I am inclined to validate Mr. Newsom's deed with the provision that Miss Dalton be granted partnership rights if she so chooses. He turned to Faith. Miss Dalton, do you accept Mr. Newsom's proposal? Faith's eyes shone with emotion. I do, she said simply. Then my ruling is as follows, the commissioner declared. The deed held by Colton Newsom is valid. However, in recognition of Joseph Dalton's evident wishes, Faith Dalton shall be granted equal partnership in the property known as the Double D Ranch. Mr. Harmon's claim is dismissed. Harmon stormed from the room, his lawyers hurrying after him. The commissioner gathered his papers, then paused to address Colton and Faith. I suggest you formalize your partnership legally, he advised, and perhaps consider additional protections for the future. Outside the land office, Faith turned to Colton, still processing what had happened. You would have given me the ranch, she said wonderingly, after everything you spent to buy it. Colton took her hands in his. I told you why I bought it, Faith, to find you again. To give you back what should have been yours, he hesitated, then continued, but now I'm hoping for more than a business partnership. Faith stepped closer. What exactly are you proposing, Colton Newsom? A life together, he said simply. Running the ranch, building a home, facing whatever comes our way together. I've spent 2 years believing the frontier is no place for love, that attachment only leads to loss. I was wrong. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond. I've carried this since I bought the ranch, hoping but not quite believing this moment would come. Faith's eyes widened as Colton dropped to one knee in the dusty street of Helena. Faith Dalton, will you marry me, be my wife, my partner, my home? Tears spilled down Faith's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. Colton slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the curious onlookers. As their lips met in a kiss that had waited years to happen, Faith felt something settle in her soul, a sense of rightness, of coming home. 3 months later, on a perfect September afternoon, Faith stood in her childhood bedroom, putting the finishing touches on her wedding dress. The simple white gown, adorned with her mother's lace, symbolized everything the day meant to her, honoring the past while embracing the future. Martha Miller helped arrange the veil in Faith's honey-blonde hair. Your parents would be so proud, she said softly, especially your father. Faith smiled, touching the locket around her neck that contained her parents' portraits. I think he knew in the end that Colton was the right man. That letter he wrote, he trusted Colton to protect what he built. Outside, guests gathered in the garden Faith had lovingly restored, rows of chairs facing an arch twined with late-blooming wildflowers. Colton waited nervously beside Reverend Phillips, who had traveled from the next county for the occasion. When Faith appeared on Sheriff Miller's arm, a hush fell over the assembly. Colton's breath caught at the sight of her, radiant, beautiful, and walking toward a future they would build together. As they exchanged vows beneath the Montana sky, Faith's words carried across the land that had nearly separated them forever. "I promise to stand beside you through drought and plenty, through winter storms and summer heat," she pledged. "This ranch is our beginning, not our whole story." Colton's voice was steady as he responded, "I promise to remember always that the greatest treasure of this land is not the cattle or the crops, but the love we've found here. I will be your partner, your protector, and your home, wherever life leads us." When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered neighbors and friends erupted in cheers. As they turned to face their guests, Faith caught sight of the ranch house behind them, no longer a symbol of loss, but of new beginnings. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and the last guests departed, Colton and Faith stood on the porch of what was now truly their home. The setting sun bathed the land in golden light, promising another day to come. "I still can't believe you bought an entire ranch just to find me again," Faith said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Colton's arm tightened around her waist. "Best investment I ever made." Faith turned in his embrace to face him. "My father was right about one thing. The Double D isn't just land and cattle, it's a legacy, and now it's ours to continue. Our children will grow up here," Colton said softly, "knowing the value of this place just as you did." Faith smiled, a secret joy illuminating her face. "Perhaps sooner than you think." Colton's eyes widened as her meaning registered. "Faith, are you saying?" She nodded, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "A new generation for the Double D due next spring." Colton gathered her into his arms, his heart overflowing with a happiness he once believed impossible on the harsh frontier. As darkness settled over the Montana prairie, the lights of their home burned bright, a beacon of the love that had found its way home at last.